What is the promise of the blockchain and what is the promise of crypto? I think these are some of the more interesting questions in my world at the moment. And also, how do we do the governance associated with these things? So that's what I'm going to focus on in my talk with you today. After that, I wanted to tell you a little bit about my own project, although Professor Greg Morrison is going to say more about the energy and water business later on. As an entry point to the discussion, and at the risk of telling people here how to suck eggs, I want to tidy up what is the difference between blockchain and crypto, because a lot of people use these terms interchangeably. And I know, even at my own hyper-advanced institution known as Powerledger, that we've had to tidy up some of the confusion there as well. So I wanted to start by sharing a way of looking at these two things that owes something to Eric Miller of CoinCircle, which might help. If you think about money and contracts as the old world equivalent of crypto and blockchain, life gets a lot clearer. Money becomes crypto and contracts become the blockchain. For the sake of clarity, I'm going to go further back than the recent digital non-blockchain era to the 1970s. The reason I'm doing that is that your contract, my contract, although it's not on paper, is probably on a PDF today. It's digital in name, but it's barely digital in possibility. It may even have a password on the digital document, but that's just a bit of window dressing. The contracts you and I have for the jobs that we have haven't really moved since the Magna Carta. They are, of course, dumb. So let's look at a worker back in the 70s. In those days, a punch card and cash you earned, money were all recorded, saved by working in an office or on a car production line. And you'd also have a paper contract that determined how and when you were paid. Back in the day, with all those dumb contracts, you needed competent people in accounts who would look at your clocking in records and decide how that time translated into money. They would generate paperwork according to and to make sure you got paid, often in cash envelopes. In other words, the money you were paid needed infrastructure around it by humans to keep track of when and where it came out of and went into the system. It was dumb, and the intelligence and some engineering was located all around it, externally and peripherally. All these locations were located in and owned by the car company or whatever the enterprise was, and you can see 1970s car manufacturing warehouse there. I think that what cryptocurrency is a way of bringing that peripheral intelligence and engineering into the money itself. The crypto coins themselves now could record when you were paid and who paid you, and so they are their own receipts and transactions inside the money. That means that companies can dispense with all those competent people in the back office functions that are now located in the money itself. It all becomes automatic, and the savings and the efficiencies are pretty obvious. We obviously do need to take seriously the transition to other types of employment presented by these sort of technological shifts as well. This is the first promise of crypto: savings efficiencies, more for less, and letting in the disenfranchised in the process. So much for the money. Let's look at the contracts and how they evolve in the blockchain era. The contracts that govern your pay all those years ago and right up until now were and are dumb. It's a piece of paper that says how often you should get paid and how much you should get paid, and any circumstances when the employer should vary your pay, e.g. time and a half pay, or let's say pay for a public holiday, or not being paid if you showed up drunk. Now in the future, that contract may no longer need to be a piece of paper or a PDF, but actually some code that's connected to a database called the blockchain. It automatically pays you, possibly in crypto, when you clock in, and could actually happen every day rather than every fortnight or every month. So smart contracts work very nicely with smart money, which is cryptocurrency. Let's think more about how far-reaching this could be. You clock in to work with an RFID card, and you start serving coffees. The system knows how many coffees you've made and sold and when the bank holidays are, and it releases just the right amount of cryptocurrency according to a smart contract. It knows if you've got good social media feedback from customers and keeps tracks of likes, shares and comments. These may form part of a smart contract bonus. The smart contract knows exactly when you get paid and how much. So it's all smooth, frictionless and integrated. Again, more savings in the back office, more efficiencies and quality control. There's actually more anti-fraud protection too, especially around supply chain issues. A funny example of this was back in the 80s in British Rail, when a supply chain fraud was happening, when a food and beverage steward on the train was bringing in his own sandwiches and selling them instead of the agreed suppliers. Of course, he pocketed the cash and made a killing. He was discovered when a passenger got suspicious that the sandwiches were too fresh, and he reported that they were much more edible than normal. That explains a lot about British food in that era. But you can see in a world where the blockchain replaces dumb contracts and crypto replaces money, the efficiencies and fraud savings could be substantial. If the sandwich packs come with RFID tags and they are registered to a blockchain, substitution like this is nigh on impossible. So supply chain fraud could be eliminated and there are savings, huge savings there. So I want to pursue this with you a little bit further and ask some questions about governance. The 70s were in some ways the high point of trusts in companies. Those workers clocking in put their lives, resources and care into those companies that they worked for, and they were often betrayed. The Mirror Group newspapers, Arcadia Group and many employees put their pensions at the disposal of the central trusted organisations that they worked for. And some of these organisations essentially stole their money. Their pensions were spent by the companies. There was governance, but somehow not strong enough to protect the workers. So they were no longer interested in repeating that mistake. And they're not particularly interested in the company's pension schemes. Our coffee shop worker will do a lot better if the money coming out of the coffee smart contract goes into another smart contract, this time for a superannuation system. And also a system and scheme that is blockchain based. And the blockchain means that the record is publicly available and you can access your own personal records and check and validate that the funds are in fact there. There may no longer be a central trusted authority like the company pension schemes of old. It may instead be an investment program that no one has ever heard of, but every part of it will be traceable and defrauding it will be harder, much harder than the Mirror Group news story. Now, who governs the pension scheme? That may not be one clear authority like a Prudential, although they may eventually re-enter the game. This particular kind of blockchain may have a country of origin, say in Switzerland, a pension contributor in Africa and investments in Korea. I personally believe that figuring out the governance will not be that difficult because the rules that will be applied will be based on the country and the blockchain that they're registered in, so Switzerland, for example. Profitable companies won't want to settle in a jurisdiction where legislation around blockchain and crypto is unclear or murky. It will be in everyone's interest to draw clear laws which aid understanding. If there's a country like the United States that has murkiness latent in its crypto legal structures right now, the Swiss blockchain company will exclude the US as part of the deal to keep things simple. And we can see that happening today. So from that point of view, in my opinion, it will be easier and more trustworthy to run a superannuation scheme and a whole raft of financial services than it has been up until now. So what could the governance problems be that we might foresee? I've written a fair amount in the past about multi-agency problems, and I can see this one rearing its head. If we go back to our coffee shop example for a moment, and you're a legitimate citizen working in Starbucks in Spain, let's say the government has a part in a smart contract and one that insists that part of the employee data isn't just work hours, but what is their tax file number. A recent story in the UK revolved around long-term citizens in the UK whom the government had failed to give proper papers and identity numbers to. These were Afro-Caribbean people coming in as children into the UK in the 1970s, and some of them as recently as last week have been deported out of the UK. It's not a great story for the United Kingdom. It's not hard to see how this kind of poor bureaucracy could make life a nightmare for the modern world of smart contracts. You're working as a legitimate citizen employee and governments mess up and rigid codes make collecting your pay difficult. Who do you speak to? Does it become the employee's requirement to talk to the coders running the smart contract system who've subcontracted it out to someone else? Who governs that? As the barista rapidly running out of money and about to lose his coffee job, you contact Starbucks Spain and they fob you off and say speak to Starbucks US. Starbucks US blames the Spanish government. The Spanish government blames the last Spanish government and maybe the Swiss company. The Swiss smart contract company says they're looking into it with the US coder. It could be a Kafkaose nightmare, and I think that there'll be some multi-agency problems like this, but by and large I am fairly optimistic. We will need to address these things, but I believe overall, just as none of us now really go to the bank to get out cash, we all do it with an ATM, and smart contracts and crypto will replace these highly manual centralised alternatives. In fact, we rarely even get money out of our own bank's ATM accounts. As governance issues around fees and interconnectivity with ATMs was worked out, so it will be with the crypto and blockchain world. We're going to finish up by sharing some insight into this brave new world, and this is how much ordinary people love the work that we're doing, and also how much of the resistance that we're starting to sense from some of the big centralised organisations. And I think these two are connected. We shouldn't underestimate the amount invested in the status quo and how it might resist change. The notions that we're conjuring up here are powerful and I believe ultimately inevitable, but we'll have to summon all their strength to overcome the forces that would have us remain in the same place. In electricity markets, what the blockchain promises is real-time markets that allow households to participate in electricity markets. So presently you get your electricity bill every 60 days, and if you do have solar panels on the roof, you get paid for the electricity you generate every 2 months. Using the blockchain, as the electricity is generated, it creates a record on the blockchain and pays you instantly, so you don't have to wait 2 months. It also provides the potential for households to participate in a marketplace that has historically been dominated by large market participants. So if you install a battery, you can provide electricity in the peak and be paid a premium price, which can help to solve some of the peak pricing issues by providing more supply in the peak periods and driving down the cost of electricity and removing carbon. I don't know if any of you read the West Australian today, but it's suggesting that solar electricity is going to basically cause problems in the grid, and I wouldn't disagree with that, although I think the West article said it's happening now, but in fact it's more likely to be about 2020. And that's why the Finkel review by the Australian chief scientist has suggested that new solar that comes online is coupled with battery storage. And if we get the price signals in place and you enable a market where small market participants can also play in the market, and you put the price signals in place and enable that market using a blockchain, you can create a more sophisticated market that ultimately delivers low cost and low carbon electricity. I'll hand over to Greg Morrison now, who will speak about the opportunity for water and electricity systems using the blockchain. And I think what's particularly exciting about this is it's happening in Perth first as a world first, and so we're not hearing about it happening elsewhere. It's right at our doorstep. So on that note, I will hand over to Professor Greg Morrison. Thank you.
Thank you, Gemma. I went to the bank the other day and it was closed, so I had an important thing to sign and it wasn't open. I spent about 30 years as professor at Chalmers University of Technology in Gothenburg, Sweden, and came here about 3 years ago. But I actually studied environmental science and engineering and I'd written 30 here, but I actually worked at that 40 years ago. That's a bit sad, getting a bit grey. And at that time, the larger regional water treatment and energy production systems were pretty much the way that we saw the modern world. They've been built out. We had clean water in our taps, a large system of water treatment train to treat the water with things like activated carbon, flocculation and disinfection, most importantly. Very important for our way of life and the water that some of you are pouring into your glasses now. And the same with the energy system. The large-scale energy system, with its built out as a grid and providing abundant energy to us in our modern way of life. And having been brought up in a rather cold Britain in the 60s, and then having blackouts in the 70s, I know what it's like to be without abundant energy. It's our modern way of life. So that bigger system, don't get me wrong, as I come towards the end of the talk, is very important. We need to have a quality in energy and water. Also resources. I won't talk about that today, but we're also thinking a little bit about the resource side of things as well. Resources and waste and how we actually deal with that, which is a bit of a Victorian system, but that's another day. So the current energy system here in Perth has been much in the same way as I was used to from Europe, has been developed over the last 100 years or so. Now the original system, the first system in Perth was gas lighting in the cities to light up the cities, very much the same as Victoria and London. And there was a huge battle between the incumbents, the Perth gas company, and electrification, as people started to realise they could have trams and other types of things. And we've studied this from a transition theoretical context. And to be quite frank, the last time there was this sort of change was that 100 years ago, where there was a de-alignment as the gas company lost out, and a realignment as the electricity system came in. So it went from one infrastructure system to a new infrastructure system, which was a good thing. That hasn't been challenged for a good 100 years. So that de-alignment and realignment happened rather quickly, and that was actually a transition. I'll come back to that at the end, because that's something we're actually seeing here in Perth today. So what has been happening over that time? Well, we've gradually built up the energy system and the water systems. But some 10 years ago, something rather special started happening in Perth, and that was people starting to realise the abundance of solar. And believe me, having lived in Northern Europe, I know what it's like to have 300 days without sun. So you have 300 days with sun, which is why I'm really red and it's all disaster. Anyway, but that's something that's been happening with people putting solar on their roofs over the last 10 years. That is what I would call the de-alignment of the system. And as Jemma said, there's an article about this in the West today, which was rather convenient. I sat and read it and thought, oh yeah, that's good for today. So go and read that later, albeit not 100% correct. People starting to get control over their energy system. So what is that really about? That's about citizens realising that we want to use, let's ignore the climate change debate. I hadn't met climate deniers until, oh sorry, there's probably some here. But I hadn't met any of them since, until I came here. So there's not, but that doesn't matter. What this is really about is people taking control of their energy and using the abundant solar radiation, which we can use today, rather than digging up something which was produced millions of years ago. So people have been placing solar on their roof, a very important thing, and it's getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And I think Gemma's done a lot of the studies looking at solar and PV, solar and battery storage, and when that's really going to crack in. I think it's happening quicker than even Jemma thought. So plentiful solar radiation, to the point now where we have some 25% of the energy on the grid as solar. And looking ahead to the next 5 years, it's going to be something like a half. That creates all sorts of problems for the base load and the system in the southwest interconnected system. Interestingly, and a little bit shy and coming in the background, is a similar sort of thing happening with water. So Perth has been in a drying climate for some 50 years, has put in 2 desalination plants, maybe need a third, but that's cost a lot of money. Jemma also sits on the Water Court board, so she knows all about this. It's cost a lot of money. But hey, maybe there's something there happening as well, with people starting to look at rainwater tanks, at taking care of this abundant water at the end of the day, despite a dry climate, that comes at a certain time of year that we can use, which we can take care of as citizens, that we can put into the subsurface aquifer and that we can feed back into our systems, our retic, instead of using high quality potable water. So there's some ideas around that. And these 2 systems, the energy and the water system, is something that we started thinking, hey, it's about time we made a bit of a breakthrough on this. So last year, Jemma and I, so we're working on this project together, sat down. There was and sketched, we composed, we reworked, and we thought through a new concept for energy and water in this part of the world as a bit of a unique and as a first. And it was just at the time that I've forgotten your Prime Minister's name, Turnbull announced out, sorry about that, announced out an innovation agenda which is called Smart Cities and Suburbs. So it comes out of Prime Minister and Cabinet. They announced out 50 million, half of it's gone. And we were actually awarded 8 million to work with the City of Fremantle as the LGA, Local Government Authority, because we use a lot of acronyms in Perth. With Fremantle, with the incumbents, so Western Power, Synergy, so the energy provider, the retailer, Water Corp have come in just recently, so they weren't in at the beginning. Importantly, Land Corp, who develop a lot of the land for the housing that we build our houses on. So there's a whole series of people, and last but not least, a blockchain company, Powerledger, that Jemma is very much involved in, and which is doing very well in the world at the present time and has attracted a lot of interest. So we brought this consortium together, and we agreed to not always agree, but to generally reach some sort of idea about how we might move ahead with this energy and water system into the future, our energy and water system into the future. Our concept is really about the value of solar energy and the value of water at the end of the day. So how do we value these sources of energy and water that don't always come when we want to use them? How do we store them? How do we trade? How do we work with this on a sort of a local level? And how do we deal with citizens having some ownership of that? I'm not going to talk about that today. That's a big project we're going to have in the future, is the actual transfer to citizen ownership of these resources, or maybe we'll have time in the questions. So our concept was that the value of at least the solar energy can benefit the grid if it's traded peer-to-peer across large-scale batteries in our urban areas. So that's one value is for energy, and that's one thing we are moving very quickly ahead with. The other value is water. So if water can be captured, or if we're able to drink treated potable water, so we keep our network, our distribution system for water, because we need a high quality for drinking. But for our other purpose, if we can capture the rainwater to meet household needs and to feed with the grey water that comes out of the house into the subsurface aquifer, which is so depleted here, where I live. There is no more. So they're having to reconnect the reticulation system. So there's a serious issue with this. If we can look after it, if we can start to manage it, if we can censor it, if we can put value into it, maybe we can create a more sustainable, reinvented water system. These are not new concepts, by the way. But what is new is using the blockchain as energy and water ledgers. And as Jemma said, in real time, which is really fascinating. To do this, we need to be able to sense, monitor and measure in real time. So we brought in the computation centre of Curtin. The project is the Smart Cities and Suburbs call from the government. So big data was what they talked about. The computation centre, who deal with astronomy and space, said this is not big data, this is just ones and zeros, this is small data. But it's data that nonetheless has to be treated in a proper fashion in terms of personal integrity. They're all over that. We've got the research integrity from Curtin. We're able to deal with it. Then the key was working with Powerledger to develop these energy and water ledgers as a blockchain, and how that data will feed in and how it potentially could be used in terms of revenue. Land Corp provided us with a site, which is the new museum site, where there's never been any museum there. It's an old museum depot, 1 hectare site in Fremantle, where we will be demonstrating what we find out from this project in real life at the beginning of next year in a showroom. So, and then that's going to be built out. So a rather different sort of development that people will be able to move into. And it's good for Land Corp. It's modern, it's contemporary. Most important was that we needed the support and help of the incumbents. So I don't believe, there's a lot of discussion about that, whether we're going to have the new Uber or we're going to have people come in and sort of destroy everything or disrupt. I don't think that makes sense. I think it makes sense that we work with the incumbents, that we work together, and we look for what that new business model is. And we actually managed to get Western Power, Synergy, Watercourt weren't there, they'll be there later. Power Ledger, so the blockchain company, ourselves, Landcorp, and we sat down on April the 10th this year, which I have hereby proclaimed Transition Day from my perspective. It's up to you if you want to drink champagne on that day, could be good. But we actually managed to sit down and make an agreement with them that we would at least in Fremantle trial peer-to-peer trading across the grid. With the idea that after 2-3 months of monitoring, work out the business models for the tariffs, and using that data, allow them to see what this means in terms of prosumers, people who are producing energy, and consumers, those who are consuming energy, and start to even out over a battery this system that will be so important for the Southwest Interconnected System grid system moving ahead. So April 10th was a big day. Remember that one. Now the people of Fremantle have all sorts of solar. There's even a few battery storage people with electric cars. There's people with, and for reasons I don't even understand, have all sorts of rainwater tanks and grey water stuff. That doesn't really make sense, but I think because the people there are a certain type of people who believe in environmental stuff from the heart, which is fine, you know. We had a meeting last Friday, so you're the first to hear about this, where we gathered everyone together. It was bring a friend, so if you're a prosumer in terms of energy or water, bring a friend, you're a prosumer, and bring along a consumer. So it could be a friend who lives next door or somewhere else. And we just had a drop-in, 4 hours, and they're all there, all the incumbents, Western Power, Synergy, Landcorp, ourselves as incumbents, we're more the non-commercial partner, and but also Watercourt. And those people, and we're going to end up with the first trial being approaching 100. We've got about 30, 40 signed up so far, but it's going to reach that somewhere. We'll go out to their properties and put in sensors. It's behind the meter, so it's not revenue generating at this point in time, and start collecting data, both in terms of their electricity. We worked out how to do that, and then we're going to work out how to do the water as well. Now you could say, well, so what? Well, the reason why this is interesting, anyone who's got a sort of grip on what's going on in the global literature, this is very much the front line. What we know is that around the world people are talking about this, and there's a lot of talk, and the best universities in the world are talking and writing papers about it, but there's no one actually doing it. And so I think the important part of this is that when we open that show, or Landcorp open that showroom at the beginning of next year, that will be a world first, and it will be the start of that transition that started on the 10th of April this year. Thank you.
We've got big power stations, transmission lines, distribution lines bringing electricity to people's homes and businesses. And really in the past 10 years, a new energy system has begun to emerge, which is a hybrid of centralised and distributed energy. Notwithstanding the blockchain, this is occurring, whereas citizens, as Greg said, 25% of households in the Southwest Interconnected System in Perth have installed rooftop solar, and it's growing at double-digit percentages every year. And nationally, you're seeing the same phenomena roll out. I think the system in the Southwest is a bit unique in that about 50% of the load's residential and 50% commercial, whereas over on the national electricity market over east, it's far more skewed to commercial. So the impact of that here is being felt sooner. And the part of the drivers behind that is, as citizens have decided to take the power back, as it were, and they want to, rightly or wrongly, they feel like that they can get a better deal if they install rooftop solar. But there's another kind of phenomena that's emerging as cities begin to densify themselves. And so what you're seeing is different types of housing based on sort of how land is assembled. And apartment buildings are becoming more and more prevalent, or strata, and it's presently about 30% of the housing stock and about 45% of the new housing supply. And so that is actually driving a lot of the built form, and off the back of that, how electricity might be shared within that. So from a governance perspective, strata law actually enables residents within an apartment building or a strata development to share electricity, or that the body corporate can sell electricity to the residents without having a retail electricity licence. And I think that presents exciting opportunities, because up until now, those people have been locked out of being able to install their own rooftop solar. So I think that's going to cause a big shift as well. And then the sort of third iteration of this wave, if you like, I think is commercial buildings installing large-scale rooftop solar. So shopping centres, office buildings, and also commercial buildings. So that the energy system's changed a lot in the past decade and is going to rapidly change over the next 5 years as well. And so I do think we need to resolve the governance around it, but the market aspect of it, I think, is just as important. If you don't create the right conditions for a marketplace, you're going to get perverse outcomes. Whereas if you can put the price signals in at the time when you need the electricity, you're going to deal with a lot of these issues that are emerging. So I think it's really important that we do that, and that as the electricity market has, it hasn't changed for the better part of a century, but so there hasn't been that kind of imperative to address these issues, but it's now becoming very pressing. And if in the next sort of 3 years we don't reform the system, we are going to end up with like long-term and big fundamental problems.
There's one bit I'd like to add on to that that's interesting from a more research perspective, and that is that what we're seeing in some of the early studies we've done in the Whitegum Valley, which is where a lot of this work started in Fremantle, the people who are already getting this on strata, not across the grid, but on strata, they're having this new way of looking at their shared energy system and shared water system visualized. So we use sort of Schneider visualization systems, and they can see in real time in lovely engineering style graphs, which we all understand, of course, which they don't. But they can, if they want, they can go in and they can look at it, and they can take control over their energy usage, their water usage. The problem is with all of this is that when you move from a system which I was very much used to myself, where you've got the big power stations producing energy, you get your bill every 2 months, and that's the one good thing about blockchain, that it's the price of a cup of coffee a day, but when it comes, it's always when you've got very little money left to the end of the month. So that's the thing that sort of happens every 2 months. You get your bill and you sit there and you go, oh, it's really high, and the interesting part about that is that, and then you forget it. And you don't bother about it. The energy and water is in your everyday practices. So you would have got up this morning, you would have probably had a shower, and you probably weren't thinking about the 3-minute shower that we're all told to have, because most people don't. They do 5 to 7 minutes, and we know that because we measured it. And so all of these things we do in our everyday practices are very highly interlocked. So it's very difficult for us as individuals to relate to our large-scale energy and water systems. The bill comes, it's fine, it all works. Now all of a sudden, we're challenged by a responsibility, a sharing, a value in a new system, which is, sure, it's still large-scale, but it's also local, and you also have your own share of the energy and water systems. And we found actually that when the residents are introduced to this system, and we've done it in the most pedagogical manner we can, or educational manner we can, and bringing in Josh, who works with us, Josh Byrne, to explain to them. And we go back 2 weeks later and interview them, and they don't get it. And I think this is going to be a really interesting challenge moving ahead in research, is trying to understand what a citizen utility actually means for people, and not just assume that they're going to take responsibility for it. Or how can we enable that, either through design or through automation, visualization? How can we enable people to move into this new system, which is going to happen within the next few years?
If you find out today or yesterday that you are using 40% more than the average people in your neighbourhood, whether it be electricity or water, that that real-time feedback as well is more likely to engender behaviour change.
That meeting last Friday is quite interesting because we had a long discussion about that within the consortium. The first thing we had to do was get the trust between us. But it's when things go wrong or when they get too high a bill, that's when the social trust sort of breaks down. And so I think we held that meeting and it was rather good. We just had some snacks and a few glasses of wine and sort of chatted to people and just build that social trust so that when we go out and put these systems in place, they know we're not going to be, the data's going to be well looked after. They know that there's good intentions here. They know that they're not going to be revenue yet unless they so desire to. And I think that sort of creating that social trust with the citizens is going to be a very big part of this change. If we just ignore it, well, it'll happen, but there may well be big issues further down the line.
That that has to be appealing to them, both in terms of the output, but the experience that they're going to have.
With the Alchemos development, when they got the solar battery trial, and they started that in a big arena grant, and they put the system in and signed up people. And with a sort of a promise that certain ones who are prosumers would have an economic benefit out of it. And then that was actually the first winter when I came to 2016 when I came here, and that was a very cold winter, and I actually remember that. It was actually very cold. And they still got big bills, and they blamed Synergy for it. And and it wasn't Synergy's fault, it was because of the cold winter, so, to be fair, and they were using a lot of energy. So they've been sort of dealing with that sort of social trust around new technologies, and you trial it and then they say, oh, that wasn't what you said it was going to be. So I think we're going to go through those sort of stages, but be it as it may, this is where we're going, I think.